There are times when the spirit feels like a lake stirred by the wind. Even when everything seems silent around, something inside keeps moving, restless, asking for rest. Have you ever felt like you've been walking for a long time, but without realizing it? Where? Now imagine an ancient trail, covered in moss, crossing a still forest. Asleep. The air is fresh. The morning light gently touches the leaves. There is no rush. There is no requirement. Just presence. It is in this space, between one step and another, that the spirit begins to remember itself. We often move forward carrying weights we never chose consciously. Expectations, fears, noises, repeated stories. The body continues, but the soul gets tired. And when tiredness accumulates, the spirit loses clarity of the path. Nature, however, never rushes. The river does not question its course. The mountain does not doubt its stillness. Everything that lives in harmony follows an invisible but perfect rhythm. Maybe what you're looking for isn't a new answer, but a return, a reunion with what was always there, silent, observing. Calming the spirit does not mean stopping the world. It means listening to what remains when the world is silent. It's allowing the dust to settle. It's creating space for the invisible to breathe again within you. This is not a journey to escape life. It is an invitation to recreate it with more lightness, more reverence, more truth. A path where every step matters, not because of the destination, but because of the presence. If you feel like there is something invisible guiding your days, if you realize that your soul asks for a more natural rhythm, so remain here. This video is for you. Take a deep breath. Let go, even if for a moment, of the weight of now. The journey doesn't start further. It starts right where you are. And in the next step, let's cross the veil of invisible tiredness together, that so many carry without realizing it. We live in days when the body continues to function, but something deeper seems always behind in life. We wake up, we carry out tasks, we respond to expectations, we cross commitments, and yet there is a lingering sense of wear and tear that cannot be explained solely by physical effort. It's a tiredness that doesn't go away common rest, because it is not born in the muscles, but in the spirit. It forms slowly when we lose touch with the natural rhythm of things, and start to live constantly adapting to pressures that do not recognize inner time. This invisible fatigue grows when everything demands an immediate response. Sounds, screens, notifications, comparisons, artificial urgencies. The mind is pulled out all the time, while silence becomes rare. Little by little, we stop noticing our own state internal. We continue to function out of habit, as if movement were synonymous with life. But there is a profound difference between being in movement and being in harmony. When this difference is ignored for too long, the spirit begins to contract. Nature offers us a clear contrast to this way of existing. Look at a tree old. She doesn't grow faster because someone pressures her. It grows because it is rooted, because it receives light, water, and time. The problem is not the effort itself, but the disconnection from the natural flow. When human beings try to live outside this flow, they create internal resistance. And any prolonged resistance generates exhaustion, not because we are weak, but because we are out of alignment. Many learn to ignore the signs of this wear and tear. They call it normal stress, routine, heavy, difficult phase. But the spirit does not understand phases as the mind does. He responds to imbalances. When there is no space for pause, for listening, for integration, for something inside, he begins to ask for help silently. This request appears as irritation for no clear reason, feeling empty even on busy days, difficulty feeling joy, genuine or real presence in one's own steps. There is also the weight of carrying paths that were not consciously chosen, ideas of success, of value, of direction, that accumulate like layers over the essence. Each layer adds noise. Each noise takes a little more away from the original simplicity of the bee. The spirit becomes tired not only due to the excess of doing, but also due to the distance from what is true. And the further we are from this, the more difficult it becomes to recognize ourselves center. Recognizing this fatigue is not a sign of failure. On the contrary, it is the first sign of lucidity. It's the moment when something inside is still alive enough to realize that there is another way to walk. Spiritual exhaustion arises when the external rhythm ignores the internal rhythm. And every journey of reconstruction begins exactly there. The moment we stop normalizing wear and tear and start listening to it as an invitation. In the next step of this journey, we will not try to speed up healing or replace the weight by new demands. Before rebuilding any path, you need to clean it. And it's about this movement inner purification lens that we will talk about next. Before any true reconstruction, there is a silent gesture that almost always we ignore. Clean. Not in the sense of erasing the past or denying what was experienced, but of allow excess to dissolve. When the spirit carries too many layers, it loses sensitivity. Everything becomes heavy, dense, confusing. Purification begins when we stop accumulating and start letting go, not with violence but with awareness. In nature, nothing is renewed without a cleaning process. Rain doesn't just fall to feed the land, but to take away what has stagnated. The wind doesn't just blow refresh, but to disperse still air. The river continues its course precisely because it does not retain what happened. He receives, crosses, and returns. Human beings, on the contrary, tend to retain, keep unspoken words, old guilt, broken expectations, images of those who should have been. This accumulation creates an internal fog that makes it difficult to see the next person. Step. Purifying is not correcting defects, nor seeking perfection. It's about creating space. Space to breathe without tension, to feel without defense, to exist without the constant weight of justifying yourself. Often the soul does not need new goals, but less noise, less comparison, less charges, less rush. When the excess moves away, something essential reappears almost naturally. There is a common misconception that changing your life requires major immediate disruptions. In fact, every profound transformation begins with small cleansing gestures. Interior. A moment of silence accepted without distraction. A limit placed where there once was self-abandonment. A respected break without guilt. These gestures seem simple, but they signal to the spirit that it no longer needs to defend itself all the time. Purification also involves accepting what needs to go. Certain habits, thoughts, and even personal narratives cease to serve when the cycle changes. Insisting on them is like trying drinking water from a broken container. It's not punishment to let go. It's alignment. What remains after cleaning is not what was forced to remain, but what actually belongs to the path. When the spirit begins to cleanse itself, something curious happens. Sensitivity returns. Sounds become clearer. Emotions stop being so confusing. The body responds with more lightness. Not because life has become easier, but because unnecessary weight has been removed. Purification does not eliminate challenges, but it provides clarity to overcome them. It is important to understand that this process does not happen once. Just like the body needs constant care, the spirit also needs simple cleansing rituals interior. Not formal rituals, but everyday gestures of attention and respect for one's own rhythm. To ignore this is to allow accumulation to take over again. Only after space is created does reconstruction become possible. Try to recreate the own journey without first purifying the interior is like building on unstable ground. Therefore, the next step is not about action, but about relationship. A more conscious relationship with that which accompanies us silently, even when we don't realize it. It's about this harmony with the invisible that we follow now. Even when we don't realize it, we never walk alone. There are subtle forces that go through everyday life, silently, sustaining the rhythm of life long before any conscious intention. They do not impose themselves. They do not require belief or understanding intellectual. They are just present, like the wind that touches the skin without asking for permission, or the light that passes through the cracks at dawn. Coming into harmony with the invisible is not learn something new, but remember to listen again. Much of the modern imbalance arises from the illusion of separation. The human being began to see himself as someone isolated from his environment, fighting against circumstances, trying to control what by nature is fluid. When this vision takes hold, the world seems hostile and unpredictable. But when the perspective changes, when we stop placing ourselves at the center and we begin to perceive ourselves as part of a living whole, something is reorganized inside. A life stops being a battlefield and becomes a space for coexistence. Harmony with the invisible manifests itself in the simplest details, with respect to cycles, in paying attention to body signals, in sensitivity to the environment. A cloudy day asks collection. A clear day invites movement. The night calls for silence. The dawn suggests a fresh start. When we ignore these natural invitations, we force a rhythm that charges its price. When we respect them, even without fully understanding them, the spirit finds support. This harmony does not depend on complex rituals or separation from everyday life. It happens when we walk with presence, when we treat spaces with reverence, when we recognize that there is something greater operating beyond individual effort. It's not submission, it's alignment. It's not passivity, it's listening. The invisible does not guide words, but with sensations, encounters, unexpected pauses, and subtle changes of direction. Oftentimes, what we call intuition is just this silent communication being finally heard, a discomfort that arises before a choice, a feeling of calm when following a certain path, an internal resistance when something is not in tune. Ignoring these signals weakens the connection. Honoring them strengthens trust in own root. If this idea resonates with you, it's a sign that something inside has already started to align. It's not "I need to hurry." Harmony does not respond to urgency, but to constancy. Small gestures of daily attention create invisible bridges between the inside and the outside. A moment of silence before acting. A simple "thank you." A step taken with conscience. Everything this reorganizes the journey without apparent effort. When this relationship with the invisible strengthens, fear decreases. No because the challenges disappear, but because the feeling of not being lost arises. Confidence does not come from external guarantees, but the perception that there is a flow supporting each stage. Walking in harmony is allowing yourself to be guided without losing your own responsibility. And it is from this silent trust that it becomes possible to recreate one's own journey. No like a rigid plan, but like a living path adjusted step by step. It's about this conscious recreation, without rupture and without denial of what was, which we now follow. Recreating one's own journey does not mean erasing what was experienced or rejecting the paths traveled so far. Each previous step, even those that brought pain or confusion, contributed to the exact point where you are now. Recreation begins when we let from seeing life as a rigid line and we begin to understand it as a path live, which adjusts as the listening deepens. It's not about starting over from scratch, but to continue with more awareness. Many people believe they need big decisions to change direction, but most of the time, the real transformation happens in subtle adjustments. A faster pace human, a choice made with less fear, an unsaid at the right time, one yes offered without self-abandonment. Recreating the journey is allowing the path to stop being an external imposition and begin to reflect the internal movement of the spirit. When we are aligned with the invisible, we realize that life does not require haste, but presence. Anxiety arises when we try to anticipate destiny, when we want guarantees before even taking the next step. But the path reveals itself while it is trodden. Just like a forest trail, it unfolds turn after turn. Insist on seeing everything at once only takes us away from the real experience of walking. Recreating also involves coming to terms with the past, not to revive it, but to integrate it. What has been experienced does not need to be carried as a weight, but it can be recognized as silent learning. When we resist the past, it continues to haunt us, pulling. When we accept it, it accommodates itself and leaves space for the new. The journey will renew when past and present stop competing for attention. The future, in turn, does not need to be a place of anxiety. It can be seen as an open field, shaped by the choices that arise from presence. Recreate your own journey. It's about abandoning the need for absolute control and relying more on internal coherence. When the decision comes from a calm place, it tends to naturally align with the flow of life. It is important to understand that each person walks at a different pace. Compared journeys is a subtle way of getting lost. What makes sense to one may not make sense to another. The spirit recognizes when a path is true, not because of the effort it requires, but for the feeling of coherence it produces. Even in the face of challenges, There is a discreet tranquility when we are aligned with the path itself. Recreating the journey also means accepting breaks. Not every moment is one of advancement. There are phases of assimilation, silence, observation. Ignoring these phases is forcing artificial growth. Nature never rushes its cycles, and neither does the spirit. Respecting breaks is an essential part of reconstruction. When the path begins to be recreated from this place of listening, life stops seem like a set of disconnected obligations and starts to organize itself as a sequence of significant experiences, not because everything becomes easy, but because everything starts to make sense. And it is this sense of meaning that sustains the next step of journey, where spirituality stops being an idea and starts to inhabit everyday life. It's for this integrated living that we follow now. As the inner journey begins to reorganize, a silent understanding emerges. Spirituality is not something separate from ordinary life. She doesn't just inhabit moments, special or elevated states of consciousness. It manifests itself in the way we walk, we talk, we choose, and we rest. Living in daily reverence is perm to ensure that the sacred reveals itself in simple gestures without the need to name it or explain it. Reverence is not born of fear or obligation. It arises naturally when we recognize that everything around us participates in a greater balance. The ground that supports the steps, the food that nourishes the body, the air that comes and goes without conscious effort. When this perception becomes present, the way of existing changes. Actions cease to be automatic and start to attract attention. Not a tense attention, but a presence soft, open, in everyday life. This translates into small internal movements. Listen before reacting. Pause before responding. Realize when the body asks for rest and respect. The guilt-free order. Honor silence as much as speech. These gestures seem simple, but they create a different quality of relationship with life. Little by little, the spirit stops feel like a foreigner in your everyday life. Reverence is also in the way we deal with time. When everything is taken care of as urgent, nothing is experienced fully. Living with reverence is giving back to your time natural rhythm. There are moments of action and moments of reflection. There are days of expansion and days of stillness. Respecting this alternation does not reduce the productivity of life. On the contrary, it gives meaning back to what is done. Excessive acceleration causes fragments. The rhythm integrated consciousness. Another expression of this reverence is in the care for spaces, not just the places external, but also internal. Maintaining a simple, clean, breathable environment reflects directly into the state of mind. Likewise, observing what we allow to inhabit mind is part of this care. Repetitive thoughts, constant judgments, and narratives of scarcity pollute interior space. It is not possible to live in external harmony without any attention to the internal territory. Living in daily reverence does not require isolation from the world. On the contrary, it invites full participation. Working, relating, facing challenges, all of this continues to be done part of the journey. The difference is in the posture. Instead of constant confrontation, there is cooperation. Instead of automatic resistance, there is listening. Even in the face of difficulties, the experience is passed through less harshly when there is this silent basis of respect for the flow of life. Over time, this way of living transforms perception. The ordinary ceases to be empty. A known path becomes different when walked with presence. A gesture, simple, carries depth when done carefully. Spirituality ceases to be sought outside and becomes recognized in what is already happening. This reverence does not eliminate uncertainties, but it creates inner stability to overcome them. It doesn't promise control, but it does offer confidence. And it is from this trust, cultivated day after day, the serenity necessary to complete this journey with clarity and openness is born. In the next step, everything that has been integrated comes together in a silent closure, where the journey does not end, it only deepens. Throughout this journey, we do not seek definitive answers or formulas for living better. What was offered here is something more subtle, an invitation to listen. Listen to your self-rhythm, listening to the environment, listening to what moves silently when we stop excessive effort to control. When the spirit calms down, it does not become empty. He makes it receptive. And it is in this receptivity that life finds space to reorganize itself. Serenity does not come when everything is resolved, but when we learn to walk, even without guarantees. Life remains impermanent, changeable, unpredictable. However, when there is inner harmony, these changes cease to be constant threats and become natural movements along the way. The spirit no longer needs to fight every turn of the journey. He learns to cross them more smoothly. Recreating your own journey is an ongoing process. There is no end point where everything comes together, stabilizes forever. Just as nature transforms with each season, being humans also go through cycles. What changes after this deeper listening is the way how these cycles are lived. There is less resistance to what needs to go and less attachment what needs to change. There is more confidence in the flow that supports each stage. When the everyday begins to be lived with reverence, the extraordinary ceases to be necessary to feel meaning. The spirit finds rest even in the midst of tasks common. A simple gesture can carry presence. A brief silence can bring clarity. The journey stops being a distant search and starts happening here, now, step by step. You may notice that nothing external has changed drastically since the beginning of this video. Oh, the world continues with its noise, demands, and uncertainties. But something internal may have displaced. A wider space, a gentler pace, greater provision for listen before reacting. These displacements are discreet but profound. They are the ones who recreate the journey of Dan out. If this path resonates with you, allow it to continue beyond this moment. No as an obligation, but as a living practice. Take this listening to the next one steps, for small choices, for ordinary days. Serenity is not conquered. It is cultivated, with constancy and simplicity. Sign up and continue walking with us along the path of the soul. Here we do not offer ready answers, but spaces for reflection, silence, and reconnection. Each journey is unique, but the invitation is shared, to live in harmony with the visible and the invisible, without rushing to arrive, without fear of feeling. And as you go on your way, perhaps one question remains echoing softly, like a whisper among the trees. What if what we call destiny is just the silent reflection of the forces that accompany us from the first step, just waiting for us to learn to walk and listen?